Good evening, everyone. It's a continuation of our signature series on the history of heavy metal. Everybody was watching Seinfeld, Friends, and everybody was dancing the Macarena in the year 1996. But my co-host, Bill the Rager, and Ian O'Rourke and I, we were jamming out to some heavy metal. So screw all that other shit. We're talking 1996. Guys, welcome back. So, Ian, kick this thing off. What was going on in 1996 in heavy metal?
Well, I mean, as we discussed pre-show, there was a lot of big events that occurred. One of the big things was the Ozzfest, origins. That's the nucleus. That's when the whole thing started, and that was throughout the rest of the 90s into the majority of the 2000s. That was a really big event for all kinds of hard rock and metal. It was almost the same kind of experience that European festivals would be brought stateside, and it really, that was some big stuff that happened there. Look at all the huge bands that played on those bills. That was big. So that's,
That was, and that for Ian, correct me if I'm wrong. I read something that the reason Ozzfest was started was because Sharon Osbourne wanted Ozzy on Lollapalooza, and Perry Farrell and those guys basically said, eh.
Yeah,
and that was her big FU to that, and she started her own festival.
Yeah, that was, and I remember that when it occurred, and that was, that was kind of a dick move. You think about it. Especially when you look at we talked about some of the tours before, the big one there when Alice in Chains opened for, Anthrax, Slayer, and Megadeth, Clash of the Titans. There's kindred spirits all across the board. You're going to be an asshole to somebody like that, but, I think Ozzy was better off for it because it gave him a platform to constantly be able to be out there, whether he had a new album out or not. He was on there in one form or another for a lot of years, a majority of the years anyways.
And those, I think in 96, they only did a couple of shows on the West Coast, and it was not the full two stages. It was maybe 5 or 6 bands. Yep. I kind of don't really remember it. It was not until 1997 where they really properly launched it. But the other big thing that happened in 1996 was the 4 original members of Kiss reuniting. I remember it. These guys did a press conference on the Intrepid, boat in New York City, and then they played all over the country. They did 4 nights in Madison Square Garden. Bill, what was your impression of Kiss? Were you on board with the reunion and all that, or what was your
Absolutely
take on that?
I saw it in St. Pete at the it was a Tropicana Dome at the time. I think there was like 30,000 people there. It was a sick show. Absolutely.
It was just, it was like at least I don't know if you guys saw him with the makeup initially. I didn't, but this was like one of those, like at all the shows I had seen, I was really anticipating this. And I ended up catching the 1st and 4th show at the Garden, and it was just great. It's just like, and it was such a shame because little by little, they just slowly started diluting themselves year after year. It would have been good to stick around for maybe 2 or 3 years, do an album, and then get out, but they didn't do that, as we know.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that probably would have been, they still had some youthful exuberance. So coming out in the full get up and playing those classic songs, you're going to get some of the old energy where as the years start trickling by a little bit more, you see Gene walking slower and Paul moves a little slower, so it's.
Yeah. The other, maybe some of the other bigger news that happened that year. Ian, you're a big Eddie Van Halen, but this was the official year, I believe, where Sam and Ed got into their latest spat and then they broke up. And I guess you could say that this was like the official split of Sam from Van Halen, and then he went solo, I guess, officially at that point in time. So, and this was also the year that the Judas Priest introduced Ripper as their new singer.
Yes. And that was a big deal because I think a lot of us, thought that, maybe that was it, and especially after, Halford coming out and doing Fight and everything that he had done. But then you get Ripper being announced, and, then you get the backstory, and then, the whole thing that eventually grows into what became the backdrop for the movie Rockstar years down the road. It was kind of a cool thing in the making, and then people weren't really disappointed, when they finally got the product, which was a good thing, because that was, kind of kept them in the public eye, so to speak, but the Van Halen thing, what was cool about that, you remember Sammy and leaves. But was this the same year with the Video Music Awards with the greatest hits, right? With Dave?
Yeah.
Wasn't it 96?
Yes. Yeah.
I think it might have been. Dave comes out with
we
them.
Thought David Lee Roth was coming back. At least I did.
Yep. And then next thing you know, that whole thing's done.
Yeah. It's like, what happened?
Fact or fiction, it doesn't matter, right? It's what we all thought, and maybe we just hoped for that, right?
Yeah, right. It was one of those kick in the nuts moments, but hey, such is life.
Yeah. And, going back to the Priest thing, got to remember, too, that Rob Halford also changed gears in this year. Fight was over, as we talked about in our 1995 episode. And this was the first origins of his industrial band that he worked with Trent Reznor on called Two, which eventually ended up having John Five play on the album, the guitarist. And they actually did a couple of showcase shows around the world. One was in New York, and I think one was LA, and one was in Amsterdam. And I was lucky enough to catch the one in New York City, where they played, most of the Two album and a couple of Sabbath tracks. And, album didn't come out for another year. And then I don't think they got very far in the tour before the wheels fell off the bus on that one, and it just collapsed. But,
I think it was just a release, something Rob needed to do. That's, that's why it never went anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Little too different for me anyways.
Well, it definitely was. When that album comes up in that year, then we could discuss that one. But guys, going back to the top of what was popular in this year, and I still look at two categories. Well, one main category was grunge. These were the still the FM staple songs, the bands. Bill, Soundgarden puts out Down on the Upside. STP puts out Tiny Music Sounds from the Vatican Gift Shop. And then you had the Alice in Chains Unplugged live album. These were biggies. They had a shit ton of songs that were all over the radio. Talk about those albums, what they meant to you and your impressions of that period.
Well, me personally, I'm not... I wasn't really a fan of STP album. I don't know. I listened to it once maybe, and it didn't grab me, so I never really got into it. And I'm not going to say it's a bad album. It just wasn't my thing at the time. Sure. And I listened to it again recently, and it still doesn't really grab me. And
why is that though? You think because they went a little poppy on that album, like the song "Big Bang Baby" and "Lady Picture Show." They were overly they got out of their darkness. I mean, you had "Tripping on a Hole in a Paper" part was traditional dark song, but then you had these other ones that were very upbeat and happy and poppy, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I get it. They were trying to be different, and they were. It just wasn't for me, and Soundgarden by that time too, I was kind of over them. I like the two songs that had some mainstream play. They played on the radio. What do you call it there? Blow Up the Outside World and Burden in My Hand. Those are good tunes, but the album overall, I never really got into that album.
I think like Lance was saying, this album for Soundgarden was a lot more poppy, even compared to, the previous albums. I mean, especially, when you look at this, just the collection of songs, it was a lot more almost tailored to radio friendliness, which kind of seemed odd for, a band like Soundgarden. When you go back in their history, you listen to them and it's this, it doesn't even seem like the same outfit. Now, to comment though on the Unplugged from Alice in Chains, this is probably one of the best unplugs that were done out of that series. I remember at the time this one, the Queensryche and the Aerosmith, I thought were fantastic. Well, and even the STP really was good, but I mean, Alice in Chains, I mean, it was amazing, the stuff that they were doing. And, and you could see Lane was like right on that final hook. He was barely almost lucid and holding himself up with the mic stand while he was standing there singing. But
yeah, he was definitely struggling.
Yeah, but he was able to deliver, and
he was, but you could tell he wasn't all there. It was it was everything he could do within his power to be there that night, that day, whenever they did it, you know.
Yeah.
And Jerry Cantrell really carried the weight. I mean, he really stepped up, and he's amazing on that.
Oh yeah.
And he, if it wasn't for him, if it was just Lane singing without any backups, it would have showed more of his struggle.
Yeah. But credit to the two of them, because of the fact that they had that good utilization of their harmony singing, where he was able to help lift him a little bit more to keep it going. So yeah.
Yep.
It's just an amazing, I mean, you look at the track list on there, it's just got so many of their great songs. I mean, they went deep, they went hits, and just good delivery. I mean, the song, I always think I love listening to Nutshell from that album, and still gives you goosebumps when you listen to it. It was a really, really great piece of art that they gave us. And just jumping back to Soundgarden, let's not forget too, we talked a little bit at the top of the episode about Ozzfest starting because Ozzy didn't get on Lollapalooza, but Soundgarden ended up co-headlining Lollapalooza, ironically, with Metallica. So there was a lot of contradiction there.
Right.
And then, Kim Thayil went on record and basically said the band broke up after this album and tour because they felt like they're already at their peak of success. And that's just such a weird thing for me to understand, how a band on maybe their fourth album, maybe their third, I mean, it was like, they had 3 great albums in a row and then they're just done. It was a sign of like the sustainability of bands as the decades changed. It just didn't have that staying power like the bands we grew up with, where they would just put out years and decades of albums.
Right. Well, at this point, you got to remember, I mean, they were already 3 albums deep before Bad Motorfinger came out, so I mean, when Bad Motorfinger come out, that was like that, that apex moment, shooting them into the horizon, and then they just blossomed, but I think, I think the whole band as a whole, it's almost like every one of the bands that came from Seattle, when success started to stare them in the face, they weren't real happy with it. As much as they were enjoying doing what they were doing, they did not appreciate having that kind of limelight, having that kind of attention. So still some good music. But
no, and then you talk about trends also, right? I mean, we had a little bit of it in 1995, but then you look at the category, we call it like new metal or newer metal, and it exploded this year. Like it was Korn released the album Life is Peachy, Marilyn Manson's signature Antichrist Superstar, Slipknot's demo Stained Tormented, which contained the song Mud Shovel that's still popular. But I think the 2 biggest albums of the year were Rage Against the Machine's Evil Empire, which had Bulls on Parade on it, and then you had Tool's Aenima, right? And that just has Stinkfist 46 and 2, the title track. I mean, I love that album. I love those songs, but this was a big shift in direction for hard rock and metal. And these are the bands that would end up morphing their way onto the Ozzfests of 97 and 98 and 99 and 2000. They became the showcase pieces.
Yeah. And, like you were, I mean, Rage Against the Machine, that's another band right there. I mean, think about it. You really didn't know anything about them. And then all of a sudden they were like, kaboom. It was just, they were enormous, because they were making such an impact. And they were, all these bands in this listing were similar, but yet they were all very different. which is cool. I mean, the Korn, I mean, they kind of had their thing going, but like when you look at like Tool, that's just, oh my God, it's just like dark, proggy, intense, music, and to their credit, a band like Rage Against the Machine is the same way. It's a different way. They're just coming from more of an urban attack mode versus, where Stained is kind of going cerebral, but yeah, there was some really cool stuff that came out. I didn't really care for Life is Peachy as much as I did that first Korn album, though. It was just a little too.
Maybe Bill, because Bill, you're an expert in different kinds of metal, but I couldn't connect to this subgenre of metal because I don't know. I just like Korn was different than Manson, and Manson's different than Rage Against the Machine, and Stain to me is like they have no identity, but everybody loves them. Like, what was it about this music? Because grunge killed hair because hair was too happy and shiny. So grunge needed to be dark. And
Right.
now this metal comes in and it's like dark and pissed off. Like what were the kids drawn to with this stuff?
I don't know. Living in Tampa at the time, there was a lot of kids that just latched onto that. It was huge. I mean, everywhere you went, you saw these kids walking around with Korn shirts and whatever. I think it was just the lifestyle, the hairdos. Remember, they had spiky hair and big baggy pants and giant chains hanging.
Stovepipe pants. Yep.
Yes. It was, I don't know, it was like goth meets hardcore or something. I don't know how to really explain it, but it latched on to suburbia, especially. I mean, suburban Tampa, that's all you saw, kids wearing that kind of stuff and that look, and you'd hear Korn blazing all over the place out of people's cars. And and when they played Tampa, it was sold out. They played at the hockey arena, and that place, I forget how many people it holds, but it's a big joint.
It was like the clothes and the hair. Like they had long hair, but it wasn't like long hair. Like even the 80s had big hair, but the 90s, like the grunge guys had long hair, dark hair. But these guys, there's like dreadlocks and cornhole
and
things and
dreadlocks.
cornrows. Yeah, it's just weird. And which guy's running around in a kilt, and I just like the instruments sounded funny. It was just, I don't know, man. Aside from Tool and maybe to a degree Rage Against the Machine, I felt like those ones stood above the others, but I just didn't get it, and they just got bigger and bigger. But hey, all the power to them because they were humongous. I mean, look at these bands now, 30 years later. Stained is still touring arenas, headlining. Tool as well. I mean, Slipknot. Sometimes I always wonder about Slipknot too. If they didn't have the gimmick with the masks, like if you listen to their music without knowing their image, to me, I would be like, oh, this is pretty good shit. But then you look at the image and I'm like, oh, this is kind of silly,
Yeah.
But
I mean, I saw them on that 99 Ozzfest or whenever it was when they blew up. And they were great, but all I could think of is like, my God, they got to be dying in those freaking outfits and those masks. But I guess people like that. I didn't, but hey, whatever, man.
I always considered it, or likened it to a comic book metal, because now, like right around this same time was when you started to see the advent of like cosplay at all of these conventions. So now people get to dress up like they're heroes or they're monsters and stuff like that. And they can pretend to be tough or they can pretend to be cool. But when you get them out of their outfit, they're just a normal person, and that's basically what these guys are. I mean, these are just a bunch of rednecks from Iowa. I mean, they just got together and made music. So
and look at what Corey Taylor has done in his Stone Sour and his solo career. Sure. I mean, when he takes that persona out of Slipknot, he's just a regular old hard rock musician that likes melody.
Pretty much. Yep. Right? Pretty much. Yep. You got it.
Now, so let's give a little credit where credit is due, but not credit, but maybe let's give a little attention to the Sunset Strip. And man, 95, we said it was dead. But boy, 96 is like the nail, like the coffin was closed. I mean, I think there was only, the biggest release was Def Leppard's Slang, and maybe Scorpions put out Pure Instinct, which I didn't remember anything about. And then you had new releases from LA Gun, Steelheart, Warrant, and Firehouse, and that was it. Can you imagine, like, 10 years prior to that, like, what the scene was? And now, 10 years later, you had 6 albums come out. 6. Yeah. And I don't remember a damn song from any one of those.
No, because most of it wasn't memorable. At that point, I think they were trying to create music to survive, or living out obligations of contracts. Well, you signed a 3-record deal, you owe us a 3rd record, so then you got these guys scratching their heads going, geez, what can we come up with? I mean, every once in a blue moon, you'll get this rare song, an oddball one that someone will throw by and be like, geez, that kind of sounds like, oh yeah, that was LA Guns. It's like, wow, I don't even remember that album. But the song was pretty cool. But then you go back and you listen to the whole piece, and it's really just not as memorable as you would think it would be. It was sad, unfortunately. But if you look at, basically what started to happen with the trickle-down effect of the grunge bands, by the time you get towards the late 90s, most of them are doing the same thing. They're putting out stuff, and it's like, that's it. I'm past that, so.
I mean, even Def Leppard, I was reading up on Slang, because I said, all I remember is the red album cover and just the logo on there. There was no pictures of the band, but I didn't even realize that Mutt Lange was out. That was the first time he had been out of the writing and the mixing and the recording with Def Leppard. So that was a big shift for them. So that's
shacked up with Shania Twain at that point, so he didn't need to be involved with this.
yes, absolutely. Maybe we could.
I'd much rather do that.
Yeah, exactly. So, Bill, you love the heavy, dark stuff. This is not the category of Ian and I, but we're always interested what you're going to bring to the table. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, 96 was definitely a good year for the underground, for death metal, just extreme metal in general. And, I mean, the list of albums that came out: Cryptopsy, Opeth, In Flames, Immolation, Dark Throne, Dying Fetus, Arch Enemy, Napalm Death, Amorphous, Mortician, Monstrosity, Vomitory. Anyway, I'm going to talk about Carcass, Swansong. And this was a weird album because, first of all, it was supposed to come out in 95, and the band technically was just about broke up by the time this album came out. They got signed to Columbia Sony, which, was a big time, but they signed this extreme death metal band, and then they got pissed when they presented them the album and they thought it was too heavy. But anyway, when this album came out, I heard it, I was like, what's this? It's like death rock. And in fact, it's called Death and Roll. But then, I don't know, like a year later, my buddy's like, you didn't like that album? And I was like, no, not really. He's like, dude, I got to put it on and you got to listen to it. And I did. And I really listened to it. And I'm like, damn, this is actually a really good album. Right. And it's heavy. It's got, Jeff Walker's got brutal vocals, but you can totally understand what he's saying. He enunciates very well. And the songs are pretty basic. They're like rock, but with a death tone to them. Right. And to me, the standouts on that are Riding in the Free World, Tomorrow Belongs to Nobody, and Generation Hexed. And Tomorrow Belongs to Nobody, that guitar riff is just totally ripping, super heavy.
Nice.
Just good stuff. I don't know if you guys ever got into those guys at all, but if you did, that's the one you might like.
Right.
I personally like the early stuff, but that album is a good one. And then Cannibal Corpse. This was a big album for them. Cannibal Corpse put out Vial, which was their 5th studio record. And it was a big change for them because no longer was Chris Barnes in the band anymore, the singer. They got George Corpse Grinder Fisher from Monstrosity. And, that was a big shakeup. A lot of people were like, oh my God, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, it's a really good record. They really nailed it with this one. It's super heavy, super technical. There's some killer tunes on it. Devoured by Vermin, Perverse Suffering, Puncture Wound Massacre, Relentless Beating, which is a sick instrumental. And it's just a great album. And I was in the video for Devoured by Vermin.
Oh, nice.
Well, tell us
I have a
about
couple
that one.
cameos.
How did that happen? How'd that go down?
I'm friends with those guys, and they said they were making a video. Do you want to help out? And I was like, sure. What can I do? So I did a bunch of stuff. I helped with production. I helped with just little things. They did some scenes at my buddy Vernon Blake's parents' radiator shop. So we had to like get it set up, and they had like a saw blade, and they're pouring blood into it, and it was shooting all over the place, and so we had a big mess to clean up, that kind of stuff.
Nice. Nice.
Wow.
And there's a scene where George chokes me out.
Oh, that's quick, awesome.
But I'm like, I'm getting choked.
That's cool. I knew we had
Bill, a question about some of these other bands on this list. Like, again, I don't necessarily follow this subgenre, but Arch Enemy this was the beginning of their career, but this was Arch Enemy, but Angela Glasgow was not in the band at this point, correct?
No, their singer, oh geez, I'm trying to remember his name, Johan, I think. They had a dude singing for their first 3 albums. And the first album, it's okay, but they were still trying to find their sound, I guess.
Sure.
But I'll say one good thing about it, at a time, 96 was not cool to rip leads. A lot of bands weren't ripping leads, or if they were, it was very quick and weird sounding and,
Yep.
But that's one thing about Michael Amott, who came from Carcass, by the way. He was in Carcass previously to this. He's a stellar lead player, and his brother also was in the band too. I don't recall his name, but he was also in the band, and they were doing there's a lot of harmonies, a lot of guitar harmonies.
Yeah, Mike Amott, I mean, he's a great player. What's the Spiritual Beggars? Was that the...
Yeah. Yep. That's another band of his, which is more rock, I guess.
Yeah. It's a little more almost stoner rock or stoner metal. Yeah. But cool stuff, man. It's got some great riffing, great playing. So,
Bill, Opeth became a big band on their own right.
Yeah.
Where was this in their career? Was this the beginning for them or early on?
This was early on. It wasn't the beginning, but they were they were another band that were trying to find their identity. They were still more death metal, but they had that Swedish sound, that signature guitar Swedish sound. A lot of people like their early stuff versus their later stuff because it was heavier. Me personally, I liked more of their mid 2000s or so, early 2000s, mid 2000s. But 96, they were getting their feet in the water. And same with Amon Amarth. I should have said them too. I can't remember if that was their first album or second album. It came out in 96.
I think it was their debut, from what I recall.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they kind of almost seemed like they almost seemed like they hit the ground running. When they started, they kind of had this thing, and they just perpetuated it the more they went with it. Yeah.
And you look at staying power. Go ahead, Bill.
I have to mention is Human Remains from New Jersey. I don't know if you remember them. They were kind of very underground, but they were very experimental, grindcore-ish, death metal. I mean, they had some cyborg, weird. They were definitely way ahead of their time. But anyway, they put out an EP on Relapse Records, using Sickness as a Hero. And it was a great album. My only complaint, it was too short. And my buddy Teddy Patterson was not playing bass because he was the original bass player.
Nice.
But great album nonetheless. Very awesome guitar. And Jim Baglino, the guitar player, went on to Monster Magnet and Dead Guy. He did a whole bunch of other stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Bill, what's up with this album called Hacked Up for Barbecue by Mortician? What's the cover of that album even look like?
It's brutality. Totally brutal death metal.
Okay. Well, again, probably the one album I do recall from this category was Sepultura's Roots. I remember this being like, this put these guys on the map of like, oh, these guys are heady, but they're also bringing this, Brazilian kind of percussive means to the music and these tribal beats and chants. Ian, what were you? Were you in a Sepultura at this point in time, or what was your impression of this album?
Yeah, I got into them previously as well through a mutual friend. But when Roots came out, I remember, and I don't know if you guys remember, but this was right around the time, I want to say it was 95-ish, 96, where Headbangers Ball kind of was petering out, but they used to still have this heavy show. I don't even know if they called it Headbangers Ball, that they would play late at night on MTV when they would still show videos. And I remember the video for Roots with them outside the pyramids, and all the people with the drums and people doing the tribal dancing and stuff like that. And I remember thinking, I said, Jesus, I go, that is freaking just brutal, that riff. It's just, I mean, it just keeps coming at you, like it takes one turn, bam, and it comes around and hits you one more time again. I'm like, holy shit. They really were intense, and I remember them making a lot of noise on a lot of the tours, the festival tours, especially in Europe, because Europeans, man, it doesn't matter if it's, Journey or if it's, the Juggernaut, they like it all, man. They just want to, the more the merrier, throw it all in one big pot and let's take it. So yeah, it was a great album. I think I still have it on the original CD.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, listeners, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, we're going to come back and we're going to visit some of these other subcategories, and then get into the top hitters, the top albums, and those metal stalwarts that we love so much. So this is Metal Mayhem ROC. Bill and Ian, welcome back to Metal Mayhem ROC, the year 1996. So, guys, one thing I didn't point out at the top was, again, calling attention that there was still an overabundance of metal that was put out this year in terms of releases. I know in the 80s there was sometimes up to almost 150 to 200 new releases per year, but in looking at this year, there were close to 100 new albums that came out, and that just shows that, granted, it wasn't in one or two or three categories, it was in 10 categories. The strength was still there in the numbers. So, something that would continue. But Ian, a couple of these other, let's say, categories, the doom, stoner, sludge, we call it the European stuff, the power metal. I mean, there's maybe two albums of mine that pop out that I loved, and the big one was Corrosion of Conformity's Wiseblood. To me, this built off of their change in sound over the previous few years, where Pepper Keenan taken over as lead vocalist, and this was like an old school metal stoner sound. And the songs King of All the Rotten, Long Whip Big America, the title track, and The Door, this just, like, it was greasy, it was sludgy, it was doomy, it was a little southern. I played the shit out of the CD. That's all I'm gonna say.
You and me both. This album, the two of them are literally sister albums. Do you look at Deliverance? Deliverance was like 1 through 5, and this is 6 through 10 as far as the chronology of sound. Two things that stand out to me too on this album: they get right back to that crossover sound that they had on the song Fuel. I mean, if you listen to that, it's the second to the last song. I mean, it's just a freaking blaster. Yeah. But James Hetfield comes on there and sings with his buddy Pepper, doing backing vocals on the song Man or Ash. And I remember at the time, because Metallica was down in New Orleans when they were doing some, I don't know if they were touring or if it was part of their recording or whatever, but Pepper actually does some work with them, and if you remember, I had in another couple of years, a year or two, I think it is, when they did the Garage Days, the second one, Pepper joins them on Tuesdays Gone in the Wind. He does all the slide guitar on there for them.
Oh, and then the Metallica took them out as the support act on the Load tour as well.
Yeah, it was huge. Yeah. But another one I got to mention there too is Crowbar, Broken Glass. Anybody that's into sludge, Crowbar is one of the top dogs in this world. I mean, you've got basically all the bands that coalesced into what Down is. and Down being part of that whole thing. But like, I mean, I Hate God, did Dope Sick this year. An insane album. But then, Cathedral, those boys from England, still putting out their, at this point, they were getting a little bit more stoner groove. They weren't as doom, but they still had a lot of doomy to them. But this was still a pretty fun album, because they kind of let that 70s thing really go at this point. They were really getting into some cool shit. So, but yeah, you were saying before about some of the metal stalwarts. I know that we all can agree on some of these ones that we had talked about. And Bill, do you remember anything about The Killing Kind by Overkill?
Well, the reason why I do know that album pretty well is because the two guitar players, Joe Comio and Sebastian Marino, were both from Rochester, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, that's what got my attention. And I did listen to that album. And to be honest with you, I didn't really care for it a whole lot, but I revisited it recently, and it's really not that bad of a record.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
It's that Overkill Motorhead formula from the 90s, where it's about every 2 years you got a new product, and every album is good enough, but you don't go back to them and remember them, but they were all relatively good.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good record. It really is. It's just not one I personally would play a lot. Sure. But when I did listen to it, I'm like, damn, it's actually pretty good. Yeah. Some great guitar work, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's like Motorhead's Overnight Sensation. That was another album. We talked about it in the last episode. This was the first with Motorhead as a trio. But, the only song I recall from this album was Civil War. But I'm sure if you put it on today, it would be like, oh, this is fucking Motorhead. This is great.
Yeah. Well, and you had said it before, Lance, at this point, it was almost that wash, rinse, repeat kind of thing for a band like Motorhead. I mean, there would still be songs on there that you'd be like, oh man, that's a great song. But like you listen to the whole collection of it, it's like, it's really not that much different than the last one. And then the next one comes out and it's like, well, this isn't much different than the last one either. They just kind of continued in that formula, which is interesting. Manowar, though, Louder Than Hell, that's still good old Manowar. That was some heavy ass shit. That was a great album. You guys got to remember Louder Than Hell, Manowar.
Yes, absolutely. That's with the guitar player that got sent to prison there.
Yeah.
Great album. It's Manowar.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time they were playing Europe. I mean, they were playing freaking arenas, which they still are. But back then I was like blown away that they can sell out arenas over in Germany, but they can't play a freaking 500 people place in New York State.
No. Yeah. And DeMeo was just talking about that not long ago. He's like, there's no money in it for him, but they go over there and they get paid a boatload. It's not worth it, which is sad. It's too bad, especially being Manowar, play New York State, Christ, he'd pack every place.
Yeah.
Well, you guys could come down in November to doing the only U.S. show. They're doing it in Queens. So you guys can come down.
Is that sold out? That's got to be.
Probably is, but it's the same theater Vern and I saw Merciful Fate at. So total metal vibe there. So I'm sure I'm going to try to go. I've never seen Man of War, but I definitely would want to check him out at least once. I think it'll be a killer night.
I did see him a couple times, luckily.
Nah.
Now, speaking of Merciful Fate, though, Into the Unknown, another great album, still consistent, Merciful Fate. Yep. But King Diamond did The Graveyard. Now, The Graveyard, this time here, this was one of those saving albums for me during this time period. There was a handful of them. They had the Corrosion of Conformity that we talked about, and this album here. I mean, it was one of those things where it's like, oh, thank God, get me some freaking metal to get me through this time. Because with all of the new metal that was coming out, you're like, what am I gonna do? I mean, this was a good album, and it's another thematic, conceptual thing that he's got. And during this period in the 90s, man, he's got some screws loose, I think, up there, man. He's got some really dark ideas for stories that he comes up with. I thought Alice Cooper had that cornered, but King's right up there with him when it comes to some of those ideas.
I don't know. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it was just amazed me in looking at this that both a Merciful Fate and a King Diamond album were dropped in the same year. You'd never see that ever happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, they usually don't plan them that way, but I think they just wanted to get material out there so people could have it. So
yeah, he usually wouldn't do it that way. I forget what the circumstances were, but they had to be put out at almost the same time, pretty much.
Yeah.
But I would say that drummer Darren Anthony, that was his last album he was on. That guy was amazing, great drummer.
Yeah,
on the King Diamond.
He's never had a shortness of great drummers. I mean,
that's for sure.
Mickey D first. So
yeah.
Definitely had some great stuff.
Now, Bruce Dickinson puts out Skunk Works. I have no memory of that. I don't remember one song. I don't know why, because I'm sure it's a good album. But I loved Accident of Birth and some of the other albums. I don't know. And then Dio puts out Angry Machines, which, I loved Ronnie during this period because he was playing clubs and little small places like the Birch Hill and the Beacon Theater.
You said that.
But it was hard to, the stuff was okay, but it just, there was nothing great on Angry Machines. It was just cool that he put a new album out, and you knew he was going to tour a couple times through, but really nothing spectacular about that album. Let's be honest.
Right.
No. I mean, and he is singing angry, like his voice. He's pissed.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When he went through the 90s, man, he kind of had a chip. You could tell with some of the material. He had a chip on his shoulder, definitely. I think after all the shit that happened previously with Sabbath and the way that the scene was going, and to be busting your ass since the early 60s. I mean, the guy started out as a doo-wop singer, and then went on and did all of his other stuff. But Lance, I know you got to have a soft spot in your heart for Rude Awakening from Prong.
Oh, absolutely.
And October Rust from Typo Negative. I mean, these are your era boys.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. So Prong's Rude Awakening, absolutely great album. I mean, they definitely shifted their sound a little more industrial off of the last one, and they capitalized off of the success that they had with the Snap Your Finger, Snap Your Neck, and that album. And they ended up on the Ozzy tour on this one too, I remember, and it was a good album. The Type of Negative, to be honest, Vern, I always respected the uniqueness of them, but I could never get into them. And I saw them a couple times, once opening up for Queensryche on the Promised Land tour, but I just never followed them, and I don't, recall really much about this album aside from the Neil Young cover song of Cinnamon Girl.
Yeah. Bill, what about you? Any love for these two?
I like the Prong album. I haven't listened to it in a long time, so I can't really give you an honest opinion about it right now, but I remember digging it back then. Yeah. Typo Negative, I can't tell you how many times I saw them. I probably saw them 10 times in a 5-year period. Yeah. That's a great produced album and it sounds awesome, but it's just not my favorite. Personally, my favorite's Slow, Deep, and Hard. That's where I come from.
Oh, of course. You're right. Yeah.
But at the same time, I get it. I mean, they were huge at the time. Chicks loved it. All my female friends freaking loved that album.
See, now in this time period, this was another one of those saving grace albums because it came from Bloody Kisses, which I got into them with the Slow, Hard, and Deep and Bloody Kisses. Bloody Kisses really kind of put me over the top. But then this album came out, and I remember because I think it was some of the intricacies of some of the songs. Now, granted, it's a little bit more polished overall, but it's still got that, that dark, grindy guitar and bass sound and the way that it's mixed, where they kind of just suck the mids right out of it, but it's not like death metal mids gone. It's like a different sound. It was just amazing the way that they put everything together. And, I always appreciated the stuff, the Addams Family and the Munsters themes being played in the middle of songs and stuff like that, because we're all kids that grew up watching that shit on TV. So good times, good times.
Yeah. So before we get into let's say the top 5 or 6 albums of this year, or at least our impressions of them, I just want to give attention to one more band that I discovered this year, and that was Iced Earth. This was my coming of age of Iced Earth, and the Dark Saga came out that year. I like that, and it got me in about a 10 to 15 year period where I really, really tried really, really hard to follow this band. And most of it I took to, some of it I just couldn't love. I liked it, but I loved it. But I think it's a very underrated metal band. And this period of albums put out with Matt Barlow singing were solid because they were heavy, great guitar work by John Schaefer, and very, very melodic. And there's some really good material on this album, like I Die For You, The Hunter, Vengeance Is Mine, and A Question of Heaven, the slower song. So guys, or Baby Bill, did you what's your impressions of Iced Earth?
They actually lived in Tampa at the time, or at least John Schaefer did. And I met him a couple times and he was cool, but man, he was very bitter against death metal. He was pissed because death metals sucked the wind out of his sails. Right. But anyway, no, that's a great record. I haven't listened to it in a long time, but yeah, no, that's solid, killer vocals, solid guitar work on there. Yeah. And at the time, I guess, I don't know, what would you consider that? Like power metal, traditional power metal, or?
Yeah, I guess probably traditional power metal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it definitely, I remember when I first heard them, I thought they were European, and I come to find out that they're American. I go, wow, so they really have that. You would have thought that they're from Germany or, someplace in the middle of Europe, because they kind of have that kind of sound. It was very, I don't want to say refined to sound like it was, it's like, oh, well, we tried too much. They just knew what they wanted to play and they did it very well. It had a good sound to it.
And that was a tough time period for that style of metal, if you ask me. At least in America it was anyhow.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, but fair point.
Yeah, but you could definitely see them on a tour with, Manowar and playing from one side of Europe to the other and hitting every festival and coming home with money pouring out of their pockets because they had a good time. So it's a good album.
Yeah, that's great. Other releases from the European and heavy stuff: Apolytica, Halloween's The Time and the Oath, In Flames, The Jester Race, and also releases from Catatonia, Nevermore, and Stradivarius. So lots of stuff in this year. As you said, it was close to 100 new albums in 1996. But guys, going back up to the top, we know which ones are left. No particular order than anything, but Ian, pick one of there's five left to discuss. These are the big albums. Pick one and let's just get into it.
All right. Great Southern Trendkill, Pantera. Another one of those saving albums. And this was, to me, like, as great as Far Beyond Driven was, this took them to another level of, it was just, there was something, I mean, obviously, the backstories with what's going on with Phil and the band and everything else, but the darkness that's behind a lot of this stuff, Suicide Note, part 1 and part 2, it's just, everything about it is just so abrasive, but it's like, it even brings some of that thrashy intensity that they played with before up to another level. You hear some of these riffs that are on there and it's enough to, you're like, wow, holy Jesus, these guys are amazing. That was another one of those saving albums at this time period was Great Southern Trendkill.
I mean, I can't listen, I'll not claim to be like the biggest Pantera fan. I like them, but I didn't follow them like with that exuberance. But I always think like even the album cover was killer with the snake and the, just coming out. Bill, I'm sure you like this one.
Yeah, especially the title track, the way that song just comes out, Phil's just screaming.
Setting the tempo right off the bat.
Yeah, just in your face. Man. And I probably saw them 3 or 4 times on that tour. They hit the Florida area quite a lot.
Wow, right. That's a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, Actually, I want to, within a year's time, I saw him 3 times. So, and I guess it would have still been on that record. But yeah, 6 shows too.
Yeah.
It's like they went through the trailer parks. Y'all come on down to the Pantera show.
Like the Blues Brothers driving around. It's a trip.
So, guys, of course, Rush is always going to be on our list, whether it's a good album, an average album, or a bad album, right? But they always make the list. So they put out Test for Echo this year. You know, it's an okay album, in my opinion. It's decent. It stands up over time, but to me, it's like an album of decent deep tracks, but nothing great. You know, but they definitely got a little bit of influence from, let's say, the grunge sound. They brought some of those guitars back. I think to me, the most memorable thing about this album was not the album, was the tour, because this was the first time they went out and said, we're going to scrap the opening band and we're going to give you guys 2 sets. So instead of getting a 2-hour show, you're going to get close to a 3-hour show. You're going to get that extra hour of music, and we're going to break it up into 2 sets. And on this tour, they played 2112 side 1 complete. So a good album. To me, it's always going to be in the top. But for 1996, because of the rarity of the great albums and the big bands, it rises a little bit to the top.
Sure. Well, and I mean, you know, like you were saying with the maybe it was the influence of the times, you know, with bringing the guitars back, but there's a certain tonality to this album. You know, it's got an edge. It's got some teeth to it, you know, and it may not be as refined as we're used to with other Rush albums, but all in all, I mean, I really don't think, even when it comes to some of our not favorite albums that we know from them, you can never go on record and say, oh, that's a bad Rush album, because I don't think Rush could ever put out a bad album, you know. No. As shitty as they, you know, we may think certain songs are, they don't put out bad albums. So I really,
it's just not one you're pulling. It's not one you're going to your CD tower and pulling out, but a decent one.
Yeah.
And I was going to say the same thing Ian said. I love Rush, but have they ever truly made a bad record? I don't think so.
No.
Now,
even Power Windows is a great album.
I love Power Windows. Don't get me wrong. We got into this on our specialty deep tracks episode about Rush, that all the love to Power Windows and Signals, those ones, to an average fan, you're not going for those, but to me, they mean a whole lot. So,
of course.
Now, guys, let's change gears a little bit. We're going to go to what I think is a great album, an amazing album by Zakk Wylde called Book of Shadows. It was all acoustic album. Such great stuff on this album. The song Between Heaven and Hell, it actually got like radio airplay. Kind of the emotion and the soul behind the song Way Beyond Empty. Just really, really good things on this album. Ian, what was your take? This was following the Pride and Glory thing. I thought it was another great album from him.
So did I.
And definitely one that stood out.
Yep. I remember getting it right off the bat. The musicality that Zakk possesses on this album is very deep, you know, because he does a lot. It expresses a lot, you know, it's got a lot of good music on there. The sad part for me was the fact that it wasn't a second Black Label Society album, and then wasn't a second Pride and Glory album, and then you never saw Pride and Glory again. That was the clincher for me, you know. But overall, it's a great album. It is a great album.
Who played on this? Who played on this aside from Zakk?
I know that I thought that Lomenzo had done something. Oh God.
Okay. Well, we'll have to go back and check that out.
Yeah, I know that. I think Lomenzo did some bass work on it. I don't know if Ticci did anything on there, but I mean, most of the actual instrumental music was Zakk, whether it be guitar, whether it be piano and stuff like that. He did almost everything, you know, on there, and you know, it's, you know, he's a talent, man. I mean, he's just got it in spades, you know, so he's lucked out in that respect.
Yeah, it's a shame. I do remember this one. Bill playing like small places in Jersey, like the Brighton Bar and some other places. And I was like, I don't know. I didn't go see it. I don't know why, but I just didn't go see it. It's a shame because I think it would have been killer to see Zakk all those years prior in a little bar playing his acoustic guitar up there.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Let's let's talk about one that I know is going to be very near and dear to Lance's heart.
I know where we're
Let's
going
talk.
here.
Let's talk about Perpendicular by
Oh,
Deep Purple. This was a good surprise because I didn't think that I would like it as much as I did. And I know that Lance, you really, really like this album. So why
I
don't you get into it a little bit
yeah,
more?
I love this album.
Mhm.
I mean, again, you talked about your saving grace albums of the year. This was my saving grace album of '96.
Sure.
The tour was great. One of the best concerts I ever saw in my
Yeah.
life. They played the Beacon Theater the night before Thanksgiving in October or November of 1996. Just an amazing show. We were maybe 10th row back, my
Mm.
buddies and I. But this is a solid album all the way through, track 1 through track 12. Not a bad song. You guys being musicians too, the tone, there's a comfortable sound on this. You put the CD on, it just bursts, and it's got it all on there. And I think, not knowing what Deep Purple was capable of recording in the studio without Richie
Right.
Blackmore, this was
Right.
Steve Morse's debut. They
Yeah.
delivered big time, and it's an album I played over and 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 over. And I
Yeah.
think if you had asked any of the band members what they felt of this album, this was one of those career moments where it was like, okay, Machine Head, and then they did 5 or 6 albums, and Perpendicular, because Abandoned came out, it was not as good. Bananas came out, was better but not as good, and then they've had a couple albums out, since then. But this one, to me, stands up over time. And the tours were great. Put these guys back on the map. They were playing all over the world, headlining European dates and
Sure.
festivals and playing theaters in the States. It was just a great time to love Deep Purple. So I challenge anybody to go out there and pull this one out. You will not be disappointed.
Bill, you got
So
any comments on it? Do you know the album?
I honestly, when that album came out, it escaped me, except I did hear Ted the Mechanic probably a few times.
Mhm.
And but going back to it, I'm like, damn, this is a great record. I don't know why I didn't get into it back then.
Yeah.
Probably it
and
wasn't in my wheelhouse. And I love Deep Purple, don't get me wrong. Just
Right.
at the time, 90, 96, my head wasn't thinking Deep Purple.
Sure.
And
like Ian, being a guitar player, you
Mhm.
think about Steve Morse. I mean, yeah, they had all the traditional riff songs, but then you had a song like The Aviator that was Steve's song. It's a beautiful acoustic melodic piece,
Yep.
full of harmony. The vocal is absolutely stunningly beautiful, and it's a song about Steve being an airline pilot, and then a song similar to that called "A Touch Away," which is another beautiful track. If you put these two songs on, you'd say, "Oh, that's Ian Gillan," but that can't be Deep Purple. That's got to be a solo material because they
Wow.
just were that different.
Well, yeah, and the whole thing, that was what I was going to strike on. The only knock, and this goes back to even then that I had with it, was it as solid and as good as the material is, and the guitar playing by Morris is great all over this thing. I mean, he hits it his way. He doesn't try to come out there and go, well, let me play off John Lord like Richie used to. No, he comes out and plays his way, and then everybody kind of fits into their groove. It kind of stayed energy level, with the exception of some of the slower stuff. It kind of stayed a lot like this, where in the past there might be something that was maybe this kind of tempo, it's a little bit more up tempo, or this one's down here. It was a little bit more across the middle, but I think a lot of that was what was coming out at the time. Because if you look at other albums, and from big bands and small bands, they kind of like, there was like a almost like a groovy kind of tempo, like, yeah, let's get into the groove, and they kind of stayed in that lock, but the material is still just fantastic, and I was pleasantly surprised. I had forgotten about a lot of stuff, went back and revisited a couple weeks ago. And this was still Gillan sounding really good.
Yeah.
I mean, he still had a lot of power in his pipes. It wouldn't be for, a while. Like now you can tell, yeah, he's older and he doesn't hit, way up like he used to, but he still had a lot of freaking balls with what he was doing in the band sounds great. I mean, I think it, like you said, it kind of was new life for them, when this album came out, there was something invigorating about it for them, so it's a great album overall.
I think,
Yeah, I definitely got to buy that.
Yeah, definitely do. The songs sometimes I feel like Screaming to me it's just a masterpiece. It's the guitar work by Steve Morse is just utterly breathtaking. There's so much emotion in the storyline of Ian Gillan's delivery of the story about, isolation and life in a road and just being in hotel rooms and being alone for 20 hours a day. It's just a fantastic track. But we can say we all love that one. So listen, there's only one album left now that we're going to talk about in 1996, but just as a reminder, if you like what we're doing, get up to our website, metalmayhemroc.com, and join our community. Subscribe, get on there, sign up for our email newsletter, and this is the best way to stay connected to everything that we do here, our podcasts, our YouTube channel, and to make sure that you tune in to us on Monday nights on Metal Devastation Radio. So, guys, we have one album left to discuss this year. What is it, Bill?
Metallica Load.
There we go.
And
there we go.
I'm not a hater, but I definitely, it's just that album was really tough for me.
Sure.
It was the look, first of all, I was like, what the hell happened when I saw those first pictures that came out. I don't remember if it was on MTV or however I saw it, but I was like, wow. And and then where I lived in Tampa, the radio just played that album nonstop. So I guess I got kind of burned out on it, but I don't hate it. It's just not really my Metallica.
Sure.
Oh, look at the back cover. You talk about the image, the back cover, right? It's the four guys sitting around like a dining room table. Kirk's got his like Cuban hat on the table. They're smoking cigars and they all got short hair and sunglasses on. And it's like, oh, this is the new Metallica, right? This is the new image.
I have to wonder, the image thing, I almost wonder if they did it on purpose. I think it was like a shock factor thing, because they were coming from one of the biggest albums of all time. I mean, one of the biggest tours. I mean, it went on for almost 3 years straight, to support that Black album, it just kept going and going and going. And then they came out with this album. Now, like Bill said, I'm not a hater either. I was really shocked when it first came out. Until It Sleeps, if I never hear it again, I'm fine. But you hear songs like 2x4 or My Bitch or something like that. I mean, almost like I feel the same way like when we did the History of Metal, we were talking about the Illusions albums. And the general consensus was, why not trim off the low-hanging fruit and just give us the good stuff right here in the middle and make it one great album? You could have done that with Load and Reload.
Yeah.
You could have thrown those songs on there, smashed it together. All right, if you got to make it 16 songs long, fine, make it 16 songs long. But there's still some good material on here. It's still some pretty rocking stuff, and the same thing goes, like Fuel and stuff from Reload. I mean, they're good rock songs, man. I mean, they're fun. It's just not our Metallica. It's not, the Creeping Deaths and the For Whom the Bell Tolls, or even back to Whiplash, or something like that. I mean, it's just different, but I mean, they can do what they want to do. They're the biggest band in the fucking world.
Well, it's like, I know there's no side one and side two, but the way it's presented on the back cover of the CD, it looks that way, right? So you have, I mean, Ain't My Bitch, 2x4, House That Jack Built, Until It Sleeps, King Nothing, Hero of the Day, and Bleeding Me. To that point, Ian, stellar, solid.
Sure.
All those tracks are good, right? The other side, I don't remember one song. Cure, Poor Twisted Me, Wasting My Hate, Mama Said, Thorn Within, Ronnie and the Outlaw Torn. I'm a self-proclaimed Metallica fan. I don't remember any of those tracks.
Yeah, no, I've forgotten.
So if you got rid of that half and put it with the other best of, you have one album. I'm with you.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's.
No, I agree that's the thing. That album, it just when you listen to it all the way through, holy mackerel! It's like it's a lot to take on, and it's plotting. There's a lot of plotting.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too. You can tell at this point now that the Pro Tools tool has come into their toolbox, because everything is too tight snapped to the grid. There's no flow or feel to it. It's all right on the line, all the way through every song. And there's very few songs. There's only a handful of them where they change and get to a more aggressive tempo. I mean, they're just right on the line. It's loses the human factor. That's all. But it's still not a bad album. So
it has its moments.
It's listen, and you think about FM radio, 92.3 K-Rock, which was the FM radio that played rock and metal at the time. I mean, they played Ain't My Bitch, they played Until It Sleeps, King Nothing, Hero of the Day, and Bleeding Me. Those are all single after single after single. I mean, just in rotation for probably a year and a half. You heard them over, and they were just ingrained in you because they were in the radio so much, right? I mean, the tour was great. I mean, that didn't happen until 97, but the tour was great. This is the one that, again, they brought out Corrosion of Conformity. I don't know if you guys remember that tour, but this is the one towards the end where they had the stage kind of collapse and the stage hands were up on the top and they were swinging.
Oh, yeah.
Freaked the crowd out. I actually fell for it. I didn't realize it was a gimmick because the internet wasn't real popular at that point in time. And I was like, what the fuck is going on here? But such creative stuff that they did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But like you said, guys, they are Metallica, the biggest band in the world, and that's where we leave it. So, guys, we covered a lot of ground in an hour. And for you listeners, listen, there's tons and tons of music out there. Tell us what you liked, what we missed, and just rediscover the music. We can't cover it all. Can't cover 80 releases in an hour. We did our best to cover the ones that meant the most to us. So, guys, it's been my pleasure. And I hope that we continue to do this again and we get back and we continue to get back on here and finish out the 90s. Right. So for my co-hosts, Ian O'Rourke and Bill the Rager, I'm Metal Walt, and this is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.